The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of our Beverly Hills mansion. $2 million. The words echoed in my head as I stared at my father's cold, accusing eyes across the crowded birthday party. In that moment, surrounded by the glittering elite of Los Angeles, I realized my entire family had been living a lie. My name is Alexandra Vance, but everyone calls me Alex. At 30 years old, I thought I had finally figured out my place in this world. After years of grinding in New York's ruthless fashion industry, I was ready to return to Los Angeles and build something of my own. My father, Richard Vance, had promised to support my dreams. What I didn't know was that my own sister had been systematically destroying them from the inside. The evening started like any other Vance family celebration. Our Beverly Hills estate glowed with warm golden lights, jazz music drifted through the air, and guests in designer gowns and tailored suits mingled on the perfectly manicured grounds. Dad's 60th birthday party was supposed to be a milestone celebration, a gathering of Los Angeles' most influential business leaders, celebrities, and socialites. I had flown in from New York specifically for this night, carrying a carefully wrapped vintage watch that had taken me months to find. As I walked through the front doors, the familiar scent of white roses and expensive cologne filled my nostrils. Mom had outdone herself with the decorations. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the walls, and servers glided between guests with silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Everything looked perfect, just like it always did in our family. But perfection, I was about to learn, often hides the deepest flaws. I spotted my father near the grand piano, surrounded by his usual circle of admirers. Richard Vance commanded attention wherever he went. At 60, he was still devastatingly handsome, with silver hair that caught the light and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He had built his empire from nothing, turning a small construction company into one of California's largest real estate development firms. Everyone respected him, feared him a little, and wanted to be in his orbit. "Alex, sweetheart." He opened his arms wide when he saw me approaching. "Look, everyone, my baby girl is back from conquering New York." The crowd laughed appreciatively, and I felt that familiar warmth of his approval. This was why I had worked so hard, why I had spent 5 years in Manhattan's fashion district learning every aspect of the business. I wanted to make him proud, to prove that the Vance name meant something in every industry we touched. "Happy birthday, Dad." I handed him the wrapped box, watching his face light up as he recognized the vintage Patek Philippe inside. "It's from 1965, the year you started the company." He pulled me into a bear hug, and for a moment, everything felt right with the world. This was my father, my hero, the man who had taught me that success came from hard work and integrity. He had sent me to the best schools, supported my dreams even when they took me across the country, and promised to help me start my own boutique when I was ready. That's when I noticed my sister Vicky watching us from across the room. At 35, Victoria Vance had always been the golden child. Blonde, beautiful, and utterly charming, she had a way of making everyone fall in love with her. She lived in a stunning Malibu beach house, drove a white Bentley, and seemed to spend her days shopping on Rodeo Drive or jetting off to European destinations. I had always assumed she was living off a trust fund or some investment income Dad had set up for her. Vicky was standing next to a man I didn't recognize, someone tall and lean with perfectly styled dark hair and an expensive suit. He had his arm around her waist, and they were both watching Dad and me with strange expressions. Not happy, exactly. More like, worried? "Victoria looks good," I said to Dad as we walked toward the bar. "Who's the guy with her?" Dad's expression darkened slightly. "Dennis Chen, some investor she's been seeing. I don't trust him, Alex. There's something slick about him, you know? But your sister won't hear a word against him." I glanced back at Vicky and Dennis, noticing how they had moved closer together, almost as if they were strategizing about something. Vicky caught my eye and waved, her smile bright but not quite reaching her eyes. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The party continued around us, a blur of small talk, congratulations, and the kind of networking that happened naturally when LA's elite gathered in one place. I found myself catching up with family friends, sharing stories about my time in New York, and fielding questions about when I planned to move back permanently. It should have been a perfect evening, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was Aunt Ellie who first confirmed my suspicions. Eleanor Hayes, Dad's younger sister, had always been my favorite relative. Sharp, witty, and fiercely protective of those she loved, Ellie had built her own successful interior design firm and never hesitated to speak her mind. She approached me as I stood near the dessert table, her expression unusually serious. "Alex, honey, we need to talk." She glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Something's been bothering me about Vicky lately." "What do you mean?" "Well, she's been spending money like water. New jewelry, designer clothes, expensive trips with that Dennis character. Last month she bought a yacht, Alex. Not a big one, but still, where is she getting this kind of cash?" I frowned. Maybe Dad gave her an advance on her inheritance? Or she made some good investments? Ellie's expression grew more troubled. That's just it. I asked Richard about it casually, and he seemed genuinely surprised by her spending. He said he hadn't given her any large sums recently. And when I mentioned the yacht, he got this look, like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. A cold feeling began to settle in my stomach. Ellie, what are you saying? I'm not saying anything definitive, sweetheart. But I think you should keep your eyes open. And maybe you should double-check your own finances. Just to be safe. Her words hit me like a physical blow. My finances? Why would I need to check those? Dad had sent me $8 million to start my boutique, money that was sitting safely in a dedicated business account, earning interest while I finalized my plans. There was no reason to worry about that. Except suddenly, there was. I excused myself from the party and slipped upstairs to Dad's study, pulling out my phone to check my banking app. My hands were shaking as I logged in, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The account that should have contained $8 million now showed a balance of $6 million. $2 million had been transferred out 3 weeks ago, with a notation that simply read, Personal Investment, A. Vance. I had never made that transfer. I had never authorized it. I didn't even know it was missing. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Someone had accessed my account and stolen $2 million. But who? And how? The only people who knew about the account were Dad, myself, and Vicky. I had mentioned the business fund to her during a phone call a few months ago, excited to share my plans with my big sister. She had been so supportive, so encouraging. She had even offered to help me scout locations in LA when I was ready to make the move. The pieces began falling into place with horrible clarity. 3 weeks ago was when Vicky had called me in a panic, telling me that Dad was seriously ill and that his birthday party had been canceled. She had insisted I shouldn't come home, that it would be better to wait until he was feeling stronger. I had been devastated, worried sick about Dad, and had immediately tried to call him. But Vicky had intercepted every attempt, claiming he was too weak to talk. I had believed her because she was my sister, because I trusted her. Now I was looking at proof that she had lied to me, that she had stolen from me, and that she had used my own love and concern for our father against me. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. I sat in Dad's leather chair, staring at my phone screen, feeling like my entire world was crumbling around me. How long had this been going on? Was this the first time? Or had Vicky been stealing from me in other ways? And what about Mom? Did she know? That last question was answered when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I quickly closed the banking app and tried to compose myself, but when Mom appeared in the doorway, I could see immediately that she knew something was wrong. Linda Vance had always been beautiful, but tonight she looked strained. Her designer dress was perfectly fitted, her hair and makeup flawless, but her eyes held a worried, guilty expression that I recognized all too well. It was the same look she used to get when she had done something she knew would disappoint Dad. Alex, honey, what are you doing up here? Your father is looking for you. Just checking some messages from New York, I lied, studying her face. Mom, is everything okay? You look upset. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw the truth. She knew. Somehow, my own mother knew what Vicky had done, and she had said nothing. Everything's fine, sweetheart. Come on, let's go back to the party. Your father wants to make his speech soon. I followed her downstairs, my mind reeling with questions and suspicions. How deep did this betrayal go? Who else in my family had been lying to me? The answer came sooner than I expected. Dad was standing near the grand staircase, champagne glass raised, ready to address his guests. The crowd gathered around him, faces turned upward expectantly. I found myself standing near the back, still processing what I had discovered upstairs. Thank you all for being here tonight, Dad began, his voice carrying easily across the room. 60 years old, where does the time go? The crowd chuckled appreciatively. I've been blessed with success in business, but my greatest achievements have always been my family. His eyes found mine across the crowd, and he smiled warmly. My daughters, Alex and Victoria, are the lights of my life. I've always tried to give them every opportunity to succeed, to follow their dreams. That's when he said it, the words that would change everything. In fact, just recently, I gave each of my girls $2 million to invest in their futures. Alex is using hers to start a fashion boutique, and Victoria, he looked around for my sister, his expression growing puzzled. Well, Victoria is pursuing her own interests. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me, and I felt my face drain of color. $2 million? Each? I had only received $8 million for the business, not 10. Where was my additional $2 million? Dad, I called out, my voice trembling. Could you repeat that? About the money? Richard's brow furrowed. I said I gave you and Victoria each $2 million, in addition to your business funding, Alex, for your personal use. The champagne glass slipped from my fingers. The sound of crystal shattering against marble seemed to echo forever in the sudden silence. Every eye in the room was on me, and I could hear the whispers beginning, the speculation and judgment that would follow me for the rest of my life if I didn't handle this moment correctly. "Dad," I said, my voice stronger now, carrying across the room. "I never received $2 million for personal use. I don't know anything about it." The confusion on his face was genuine, and it broke my heart to see it. This man, my hero, was realizing in front of all his friends and business associates that someone in his family had betrayed his trust. His eyes moved from me to Vicky, who had gone pale as death beside Dennis Chen. "Victoria?" "Dad, Vicky's voice was barely a whisper. "I can explain." "Explain what?" Dad's voice was getting louder, more dangerous. "Explain why your sister doesn't know about money I sent specifically for her?" That's when Aunt Ellie stepped forward, a manila folder in her hands. I hadn't seen her approach, but she must have been preparing for this moment. "Richard," she said quietly, "I think you need to see this." She handed him the folder, and I watched my father's face change as he read whatever was inside. The confusion turned to shock, then to a cold, terrible anger that I had only seen a few times in my life. "Bank statements," he said, his voice deadly quiet, showing 2 separate transfers of $2 million each, one to Alexandra Vance, one to Victoria Vance. He looked up at Vicky, who was now openly crying. "The first account still has most of its money. The second account is empty." The party guests were completely silent now, sensing the family drama unfolding before them but not understanding the full scope of what was happening. Dennis Chen was edging toward the door, clearly trying to escape, but Dad's security team had noticed and moved to block the exits. "Victoria," Dad said, his voice carrying the weight of a judge passing sentence, "did you take your sister's money?" Vicky collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "I didn't mean to." Dennis said it was an investment. He said we could double it and pay Alex back before she ever knew. "An investment in what?" Dad demanded. Dennis finally spoke up, his smooth confidence completely gone. "Mr. Vance, if I could just explain." "You'll explain to the police." Dad cut him off. "Ellie, call 911. I want these 2 arrested for theft." "Richard, no." Mom finally spoke up, rushing to Vicky's side. "She's our daughter. We can handle this privately." Dad turned to look at his wife, and I saw the moment he realized the full extent of the betrayal. "You knew, didn't you, Linda? You knew what they were doing." Mom's silence was answer enough. I felt like I was watching my family disintegrate in real time, in front of a room full of Los Angeles' most powerful people. The humiliation was overwhelming, but underneath it was something else, a burning anger that I had never felt before. These people, my own family, had stolen from me. They had lied to my face, manipulated my emotions, and violated my trust in the most fundamental way possible. And they had done it all while smiling at me, hugging me, telling me they loved me. $2 million, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. Everyone turned to look at me. My own sister stole $2 million from me, and my mother helped her do it. Vicky looked up at me with mascara-streaked cheeks. "Alex, please. I was going to pay you back. I swear I was." "With what money?" I demanded. "You spent it all. The yacht, the trips, the jewelry. You spent my money on yourself and never intended to pay me back." "That's not true." "Then where is it, Vicky? Where's my $2 million? She couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. The money was gone, spent on a lifestyle she couldn't afford, wasted on a man who had probably been planning to disappear with whatever was left. Dad was on the phone with the police, his voice clipped and professional as he reported the theft. Mom was still trying to comfort Vicky, as if she were the victim in all this. And I was standing in the middle of our destroyed family, finally seeing everyone clearly for the first time in my life. The police arrived within minutes, along with Dad's attorney, Marcus Webb, who lived nearby and had rushed over when Dad called him. The party guests were politely asked to leave, and within an hour, our house went from a celebration to a crime scene. Detective Sarah Miller, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, took statements from everyone involved. When she spoke to me, her expression was sympathetic but professional. "Miss Vance, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened and when you first became aware that money was missing from your account." I told her everything. The phone call from Vicky about Dad being sick, the lies about the party being canceled, my discovery of the missing funds upstairs. Detective Miller took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, treating this like what it was, a serious financial crime. "And you're certain you never authorized this transfer?" "Absolutely certain. I didn't even know I was supposed to receive that money. As far as I knew, Dad had given me $8 million for my business, not $10 million total. We'll need to examine all the accounts involved, get records from the banks. This kind of financial fraud, we're looking at felony charges." Felony charges. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. My sister, my own flesh and blood, was going to prison. Vicky was arrested that night, along with Dennis Chen. Mom wasn't charged immediately, but Detective Miller made it clear that her cooperation would be expected as the investigation continued. The house that had been filled with laughter and celebration just hours before was now empty except for Dad, Aunt Ellie, and me. We sat in Dad's study, the same room where I had discovered the theft, trying to make sense of what had happened to our family. "I'm so sorry, Alex," Dad said, his voice heavy with exhaustion and guilt. "I trusted them. I trusted my own wife and daughter, and they betrayed not just me, but you." "It's not your fault," I told him, though part of me was angry at him too. How had he not known? How had he not seen what was happening right under his nose? Aunt Ellie was more practical. "The question now is, what happens next? Richard, you need to decide how you want to handle the family finances going forward. And Alex, you need to decide how much of a relationship you want with any of them after this." The answer to that second question was becoming clearer by the hour. As I sat there in the quiet house, processing the events of the evening, I realized that I felt relieved. For the first time in years, I could see my family clearly, without the haze of obligation and misplaced loyalty that had blinded me for so long. Vicky had always been jealous of me. I could see that now. She resented that Dad trusted me with the business money, that he respected my work ethic and my dreams. So she had decided to take what she felt she deserved, regardless of how it would hurt me. And Mom had chosen Vicky over me, had chosen to protect the daughter who was stealing rather than the daughter who was being victimized. That betrayal might have been the deepest cut of all. Over the next few weeks, as the legal proceedings moved forward, the full scope of the theft became clear. Vicky and Dennis hadn't just stolen my $2 million. They had also used forged documents to access other accounts, racking up credit card debt in my name, and even attempting to mortgage a property that Dad had put in my name years earlier. The prosecutor, District Attorney James Harrison, called it one of the most extensive cases of family financial fraud he had seen in his career. They were systematic about it. He told us during a meeting in his office. This wasn't a moment of desperation or a single bad decision. They planned this out, created false documents, and would have continued if they hadn't been caught. Vicky eventually pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and theft. Dennis Chen, who had a previous record of financial crimes, was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. Vicky got 3 years, though she would be eligible for parole in 18 months. Mom avoided prison time by agreeing to testify against Dennis Chen and provide full cooperation with the investigation. But her marriage to Dad was over. The divorce was swift and brutal, with Dad retaining nearly all the assets and Mom moving to a small apartment in Burbank. Through it all, I found myself feeling surprisingly at peace. Yes, I had been betrayed by the people closest to me. Yes, I had lost money and trust and the family I thought I knew. But I had also gained something invaluable: clarity. For the first time in my life, I could see exactly who supported me and who didn't. Dad, despite his blindness to what was happening, was genuinely remorseful and committed to making things right. Aunt Ellie had been the hero of the whole situation, quietly gathering evidence and protecting me when no one else would. And I had learned something about myself. I was stronger than I had ever imagined. When faced with betrayal and loss, I hadn't crumbled. I had stood up, demanded the truth, and refused to be a victim. 6 months after that terrible birthday party, I was back in Los Angeles permanently, using my business funding to open not just one boutique, but a flagship store in Beverly Hills with plans for expansion. I called it Vance Legacy, partly as a tribute to Dad, and partly as a reclamation of what that name meant. Where Vicky had seen the Vance name as an entitlement, something that gave her the right to take what she wanted, I saw it as a responsibility. We were builders, creators, people who earned our success through hard work and integrity. That was the legacy I wanted to continue. The store was everything I had dreamed of and more. Located on Rodeo Drive, it featured carefully curated collections from emerging designers alongside my own private label pieces. I had learned during my years in New York that true luxury wasn't about expense. It was about quality, craftsmanship, and authenticity. My private label focused on clothes for strong women: sharp blazers that commanded respect in boardrooms, elegant dresses that transitioned seamlessly from day to night, and casual pieces that never sacrificed sophistication for comfort. Every piece told a story of female empowerment, of women who knew their worth and weren't afraid to show it. The response was overwhelming. Fashion bloggers and magazines picked up on the story behind the brand, the idea of a woman who had overcome betrayal to build something beautiful and meaningful. Within months, I was booking appointments with celebrities, socialites, and businesswomen who wanted to be part of the Vance legacy story. Dad was incredibly proud. He would visit the store regularly, marveling at what I had built, introducing me to his business contacts as my daughter, the fashion mogul. It was a far cry from the broken man who had sat in his study that terrible night, wondering how his family had fallen apart so completely. 1 year after the arrests, I received a letter from Vicky. She was writing from prison, asking for forgiveness, claiming that she had found religion and wanted to make amends. The letter was full of apologies and promises, explanations about how Dennis had manipulated her, and pleas for me to visit her. I read it once, then threw it away. I had forgiven Vicky, in the sense that I wasn't carrying anger toward her anymore. The resentment and hurt had been replaced by something much more powerful: indifference. She was no longer a factor in my life, no longer someone whose opinions or needs mattered to me. That might sound cold, but it was actually incredibly liberating. For 30 years, I had been trying to earn Vicky's approval, to be the little sister she could be proud of. Now I understood that her approval had never been worth having. She was selfish, entitled, and willing to hurt people to get what she wanted. Why would I care what someone like that thought of me? The second year of Vance Legacy was even more successful than the first. I opened a second location in New York, bringing my California aesthetic to the East Coast market. I hired a team of talented designers and business managers, building a company culture based on the values I had learned the hard way: honesty, loyalty, and mutual respect. I also began dating again, something I had avoided during the legal proceedings and the first year of business. It was scary at first, trusting someone new after being so thoroughly betrayed by my family. But I had learned to recognize the warning signs, to trust my instincts when something felt off. I met David at a charity gala, a pediatric surgeon who was as driven and passionate about his work as I was about mine. He was kind, funny, and completely unimpressed by my family's money or my business success. He liked me for who I was, not what I could do for him. 3 years after that horrible birthday party, David proposed to me on the beach in Malibu, at sunset, with no fanfare or cameras or social media posts. Just the two of us, making a promise to build a life together based on trust and mutual support. The wedding was small, held in the garden of our new house in the Hollywood Hills. Dad walked me down the aisle, beaming with pride. Aunt Ellie was my maid of honor. There were no empty chairs or missing family members. Everyone present was someone who truly belonged in our lives. Vicky was released from prison 2 months before my wedding. She sent a card, asking if she could attend, promising that she had changed. I didn't respond. Mom also reached out, asking if we could have lunch, if we could try to rebuild our relationship. I agreed to meet her once, at a neutral restaurant in Beverly Hills, curious to see if she had learned anything from the destruction of our family. She looked older, tired, living in a small apartment and working as a receptionist at a dental office. The designer clothes and perfect hair were gone, replaced by the reality of a woman who had lost everything by choosing the wrong side. "I made a terrible mistake, Alex," she told me over coffee. "I should have protected you instead of enabling Victoria. I should have been your mother first." "Yes, you should have," I agreed. "But you weren't, and now we all have to live with the consequences. Can't we try to rebuild? Can't you forgive me?" I considered her question carefully. "I can forgive you, Mom. I already have. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean pretending this didn't happen. You chose Vicky over me when it mattered most. That's not something I can just get over." She cried then, the kind of deep, regretful tears that come from truly understanding what you've lost. I felt sorry for her, but I didn't feel obligated to fix her pain. That wasn't my responsibility anymore. We finished our coffee in relative silence, and when we parted ways outside the restaurant, we both knew it was for the last time. Some relationships can survive betrayal, but ours couldn't. Too much damage had been done, too much trust had been broken. 5 years after starting Vance Legacy, I was featured on the cover of Forbes as one of America's most successful young entrepreneurs. The article detailed my journey from family betrayal to business success, framing it as a story of resilience and determination. During the photo shoot, the photographer asked me to look contemplative, to capture the depth of experience that had shaped my success. As I posed in one of my own designs, a sharp black blazer that had become something of a signature piece, I thought about how far I had traveled from that terrible night at Dad's birthday party. That woman, the one who had believed family loyalty meant accepting any treatment, who had trusted without question and forgiven without boundaries, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more selective about who she allowed into her inner circle. The success of my business wasn't revenge against Vicky and Mom. It was validation of the choices I had made to put myself first for once in my life. Every dress sold, every new location opened, every positive review was proof that I had been right to walk away from people who didn't value me. Dad, now in his mid-60s, had become not just my father but one of my closest friends. He had learned from the mistakes of his first marriage, becoming more observant, more willing to trust his instincts about people. He was dating a lovely woman named Sarah, a retired teacher who appreciated him for his character rather than his wealth. "You saved us all, you know," he told me one evening as we walked through the original Vance Legacy store after closing. "When you stood up that night, when you refused to let them get away with it, you saved our family's integrity." "I saved myself," I corrected him. "Everything else was just a side effect." He smiled at that, understanding what I meant. The old Alex would have minimized her role, would have deflected credit and praised others. The new Alex took responsibility for her own success and didn't apologize for it. On my 35th birthday, exactly 5 years after the night that changed everything, I threw my own party at the Vance Legacy flagship store. It was elegant but not ostentatious, filled with people who genuinely cared about me rather than what I could do for them. David gave a toast that made me cry, talking about my courage and strength, about how I had turned pain into purpose and betrayal into business success. Dad spoke about how proud he was, how watching me build something beautiful from something broken had restored his faith in the Vance name. Aunt Ellie, now in her 70s but still sharp as a tack, raised her glass and said, "To Alex, who learned that the most important legacy isn't what your family gives you, but what you build for yourself." As the evening wound down, I stood on the store's balcony overlooking Rodeo Drive, watching the lights of Beverly Hills twinkle below. 5 years ago, I had been a different person, living a different life, trusting the wrong people and accepting treatment I would never tolerate now. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been nights when I cried myself to sleep, mourning not just the money that was stolen but the family I thought I had. There had been moments of doubt, when I wondered if I was being too harsh, too unforgiving, too quick to cut people out of my life. But standing there on my 35th birthday, surrounded by people who loved and respected me, running a business that employed dozens of people and brought beauty into the world, I knew I had made the right choices. Sometimes the greatest gift a betrayal can give you is clarity. It can show you exactly who people really are, beneath all the pretenses and promises. It can force you to decide what you're willing to accept and what you're not. My sister and mother had taught me that family relationships, like all relationships, are earned. They don't exist simply because of shared DNA or shared history. They exist because of shared values, mutual respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. When those elements are missing, when someone is willing to lie to you, steal from you, and manipulate your emotions for their own benefit, then the relationship is already over. The only question is whether you'll admit it to yourself and act accordingly. I had chosen to act, to walk away, to build something new rather than trying to repair something that was fundamentally broken. It was the hardest decision I had ever made, but also the best. As I locked up the store that night and walked to my car, I thought about Vicky. Probably asleep in her small apartment somewhere in the valley, working a minimum wage job and still paying restitution for the money she had stolen. I thought about Mom, alone in her tiny place in Burbank, having lost her husband, her lifestyle, and her relationship with both daughters. I didn't feel triumphant about their circumstances. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied by their downfall. Mostly, I felt grateful that I was no longer connected to their choices, their problems, or their pain. The old Alex would have felt guilty about that emotional distance. She would have worried that she was being cruel, that family should forgive and forget, that love meant accepting any behavior. But the woman I had become understood that love doesn't mean martyrdom. It doesn't mean allowing people to hurt you repeatedly while you smile and pretend everything is fine. Real love requires boundaries, standards, and sometimes the courage to walk away from people who refuse to meet them. My story wasn't a revenge fantasy or a tale of getting even with people who wronged me. It was something more important, a story of learning to value myself enough to demand better treatment from the people in my life. The money Vicky stole had been recovered, mostly through the sale of assets she and Dennis had purchased with it. But the real treasure I had gained was much more valuable. The knowledge that I could survive betrayal, that I could build something beautiful from the ashes of broken relationships, and that I was strong enough to stand alone if necessary. I didn't need my family's approval anymore. I didn't need their validation or their acceptance. I had learned to give those things to myself, and in doing so, I had found a peace that no amount of money or success could have provided. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Beverly Hills, I thought about the future. David and I were talking about starting a family, about building something new and beautiful together. The business was expanding internationally, with plans for stores in London and Paris. Most importantly, I was happy. Not the desperate, approval-seeking happiness I had chased for so many years, but the deep, settled contentment that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. The hidden cuts that my family had inflicted had healed into scars that reminded me of my strength, not my victimhood. I had learned that sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who teach you the most valuable lessons about yourself, and sometimes the best revenge is simply living well without them.